Welcome back to Heroes of the Greatest Generation. This channel is about real men who faced impossible odds and chose to fight anyway. Tonight's story isn't about someone who was born to be a soldier. It's not about a man who came from wealth or privilege. It's about a kid from Texas who stood 5'5" and weighed barely 110 pounds soaking wet. A kid who Hollywood rejected because he looked too young, too small, too ordinary. But when the world needed heroes most, this ordinary kid did something so extraordinary that even today, 70 years later, people still can't believe it really happened. If you think courage has nothing to do with size, hit that like button. If you believe this story needs to be told, make sure to subscribe because this is the kind of legend they don't make movies about anymore, but we tell it here. June 20th, 1925, Hunt County, Texas. The sun was brutal that morning, the kind of heat that makes the air shimmer and the earth crack. In a sharecropper's shack that barely kept the rain out, Audie Murphy was giving birth to her 6th child. No doctor, no hospital, just a midwife and prayers whispered in the dark. When that baby finally came into the world, he weighed less than 5 pounds. Skinny, pale, with eyes that seemed too big for his face. They named him Audie Leon Murphy. Nobody in that room could have imagined that this fragile little boy would one day become the most decorated soldier in American history. The Murphy family didn't have much. Actually, they didn't have anything. Emmett Murphy, Audie's father, was a sharecropper who drank more than he worked. Josie tried to hold the family together, but poverty has a way of breaking even the strongest people. There were 12 kids in that house, and most nights there wasn't enough food to go around. Audie learned early that if you wanted to eat, you had to fight for it. If you wanted to survive, you had to be tougher than your circumstances. When Audie was 5 years old, his father walked out. Just packed his few belongings and disappeared into the Texas dust, leaving Josie alone with 12 mouths to feed and no way to feed them. That's when Audie stopped being a kid. While other 5-year-olds were playing with toys, Audie was learning to hunt. His older brother Tip taught him to shoot with an old .22 rifle that had seen better days. The rifle was almost as big as Audie was, but he had steady hands and patience that seemed impossible for someone so young. Every morning before dawn, Audie would slip out of the house with that rifle and disappear into the East Texas woods. Rabbits, squirrels, anything that moved and could feed his family. He wasn't playing war games or pretending to be a soldier. He was putting food on the table because if he didn't, his little brothers and sisters would go hungry. By the time he was 8 years old, Audie could put a bullet through a rabbit's eye at 50 yards. Not because he wanted to, but because he had to. There was no room for wasted shots when every bullet meant the difference between eating and starving. The other kids in town called him names. Shorty, Runt, Babyface. They'd laugh at his patched clothes and his worn-out shoes. They'd tease him about his father running off, about his family living in that broken-down shack on the wrong side of town. But they stopped laughing when they saw what happened to anyone who tried to push him around. Audie had learned something in those woods that the other kids hadn't. When you're small and the world is trying to crush you, you don't back down. You fight and you keep fighting until the other guy stops. School was a luxury the Murphy family couldn't afford. While other kids his age were learning to read and write, Audie was working cotton fields from sunup to sundown, his small hands bleeding from the sharp bowls, his back aching from bending over row after endless row. 50 cents a day if he was lucky, $1 if the crop was good. Every penny went to keeping his family alive, but the hardest lesson was still coming. When Audie was 16, his mother Josie got sick, really sick. The kind of sick that happens when you spend 20 years working yourself to death trying to feed a family with nothing. There was no money for a doctor, no money for medicine. Audie could only watch as the strongest person he'd ever known wasted away in that same bed where she'd brought him into the world. She died holding his hand, whispering that he had to take care of the little ones now. He was 16 years old, and suddenly he was the head of a family that had nothing but each other. After the funeral, what was left of the Murphy family scattered like leaves in a storm. The younger kids went to live with relatives. The older ones struck out on their own. Audie found himself alone in that empty shack, surrounded by memories and silence. For the first time in his life, he didn't have anyone depending on him. For the first time in his life, he could think about what he wanted to do instead of what he had to do. That's when the war found him. December 7th, 1941, Pearl Harbor. The news crackled over a neighbor's radio, and suddenly everything changed. America was going to war, and every able-bodied man was needed. Audie looked at himself in the cracked mirror hanging in his mother's old room. 5'5", 110 pounds, baby-faced and soft-spoken. He didn't look like a soldier. He didn't feel like a hero. But he knew one thing for certain. He was tired of being pushed around. He was tired of watching the strong prey on the weak. And if there was a fight coming, he wanted to be part of it. The next morning, Audie walked 15 miles to the nearest recruiting station in Greenville, Texas. The Marine recruiter took one look at him and laughed. Too small, too young, too soft. The Navy recruiter shook his head. Same story. But when Audie walked into the Army recruiting office, something different happened. The sergeant behind the desk was older, weathered, with eyes that had seen enough of life to recognize something in this skinny kid from the backwoods. The physical exam was a joke. Audie barely met the height requirement. He was underweight by 20 pounds. He looked like a strong wind would blow him over. But when they put a rifle in his hands, something clicked. His grip was steady, his stance perfect, his eyes focused and calm. The range instructor, a crusty old sergeant who'd seen thousands of recruits come and go, watched Audie put 5 rounds through the same hole at 100 yards, then 200 yards, then 300. The sergeant walked over and looked at this baby-faced kid who'd just outshot men twice his size. "Son, where'd you learn to shoot like that?" Audie looked up with those big, serious eyes and said quietly, "Had to eat, Sergeant." That was it. No bragging, no stories, just the simple truth. He'd learned to shoot because his family's survival depended on it. Every shot had mattered. Every miss meant empty stomachs and disappointed faces. 3 weeks later, Private Audie L. Murphy shipped out to Camp Walters, Texas for basic training. He was 18 years old, weighed 112 pounds, and looked like he belonged in high school, not the United States Army. The other recruits took one look at him and figured he'd wash out in a week. The drill sergeant saw a soft-spoken kid from nowhere who'd probably cry for his mama the first time someone yelled at him. They were all wrong, dead wrong. Because what they couldn't see was what those years of poverty and responsibility had built inside him. A core of steel wrapped in quiet determination. The ability to endure pain without complaining. The willingness to do whatever it took, no matter the cost. They saw a boy. What they got was a weapon waiting to be forged. Basic training at Camp Walters was supposed to break men down and build them back up as soldiers. For most recruits, it was the hardest thing they'd ever done. Long marches with full packs, obstacle courses in the Texas heat, drill sergeants screaming in their faces about everything from how they made their beds to how they held their rifles. Grown men cried. Tough guys from the city quit and went home. But for Audie Murphy, basic training was just another day at the office. While other recruits complained about the food, Audie ate everything on his plate and asked for seconds. He'd spent too many nights going to bed hungry to waste a single bite. While others groaned about the 5 a.m. wake-up call, Audie was already up, making his bunk with hospital corners sharp enough to cut glass. He'd been getting up before dawn for years. While others struggled with the physical demands, Audie moved through every exercise with quiet efficiency. His body was small, but it was hardened by years of manual labor and shaped by necessity. The drill sergeants noticed. Sergeant Mike Kowalski, a veteran of World War I who'd seen everything the Army had to offer, watched this quiet kid from Texas with growing respect. During weapons training, while other recruits fumbled with their rifles and struggled to hit targets at 100 yards, Audie consistently put rounds exactly where he wanted them. Close quarters combat, long-distance shooting, moving targets, it didn't matter. The rifle was just an extension of his will, but it wasn't just his shooting that caught attention. It was how he carried himself. No swagger, no bragging, no need to prove anything to anyone. He did what he was told, helped other recruits when they struggled, and never complained about anything. Ever. The other soldiers started calling him Babyface, but it wasn't mockery anymore. It was respect mixed with wonder. How could someone who looked like he should be delivering newspapers be the best soldier in their unit? The answer came during a night training exercise 6 weeks into basic. The recruits were divided into 2 teams for a mock battle in the East Texas wilderness. Audie's team was supposed to defend a hill while the other team attacked. Standard training stuff. But something went wrong, really wrong. Private Tommy Henderson, a kid from Chicago who'd never been outside the city before, got separated from his unit during the exercise. Lost in the dark woods, no compass, no radio, just panic and confusion. By morning, Henderson had been missing for 8 hours. Search parties went out. Officers paced and worried about explaining to headquarters how they'd lost a recruit during a training exercise. That's when Audie asked permission to look for him. The captain looked at this skinny kid and almost said no. But something in Audie's eyes made him reconsider. "You think you can find him, Murphy?" Audie nodded once. "Yes, sir, I'll find him." Audie disappeared into those woods like he was going home. Because in a way, he was. These were the same kind of woods where he'd learned to hunt as a child, the same thick undergrowth and twisted trails where he'd tracked rabbits and deer to feed his family. He moved through the terrain reading signs that others couldn't see. A broken branch here, a footprint there, disturbed leaves that told a story of fear and confusion. 4 hours later, he emerged from the tree line with Henderson on his back. The Chicago kid was dehydrated, scared and embarrassed, but alive. He'd fallen into a ravine in the dark and twisted his ankle. Without Audie, he might have died out there. The captain stared at these two young soldiers, one who'd been lost and helpless, the other who'd found him when experienced search teams had failed. That night, Sergeant Kowalski pulled Audie aside. "Murphy, I've been in this army for 23 years. I've seen recruits who were big, recruits who were tough, recruits who talked a good game. But I've never seen anyone like you. You don't look like much, but you've got something inside that can't be taught." Audie looked up at the sergeant with those serious eyes. "What's that, Sergeant?" Kowalski was quiet for a long moment. "Heart, son. Pure heart. And that's worth more than size or strength or anything else." 3 months later, Private Murphy graduated from basic training at the top of his class. Not just top marksman, though he was that. Not just best physical fitness scores, though he earned those too. He was voted most likely to succeed by his fellow recruits. Kids who'd started training thinking he was too small, too young, too soft now looked at him with something approaching awe. They'd watched him help struggling soldiers learn to shoot. They'd seen him volunteer for every dangerous assignment. They'd witnessed him lead by example without ever raising his voice or demanding attention. The orders came down in January 1943. The 15th Infantry Regiment, 3rd Infantry Division. Destination, North Africa. The war was heating up and they needed soldiers who could fight. Real soldiers, not parade ground pretty boys. Audie Murphy was finally going to war. And the world was about to discover what happened when you took a kid who'd been fighting for survival his whole life and gave him a uniform, a rifle, and an enemy to fight. The troop ship that carried them across the Atlantic was packed with young Americans, most of whom had never been outside their home states, let alone across an ocean. They played cards, told stories, wrote letters home. Some were excited about the adventure ahead, others were quietly terrified. Audie spent most of the voyage alone at the rail, staring out at the endless gray water, thinking about the family he'd left behind and the war that waited ahead. A corporal named Jake Williams from Alabama struck up a conversation one evening. "You scared, Murphy?" he asked, lighting a cigarette with shaking hands. Audie was quiet for a long moment, watching the waves. "I don't know," he said finally. "I've been scared before. Been hungry, been cold, been alone. But I've never been in a fight where the other guy was trying to kill me." Williams laughed nervously. "Yeah, well, that's what we signed up for, right?" Audie turned and looked at him with those steady eyes. "No," he said quietly. "We signed up to kill them first." February 1943, Casablanca, Morocco. The heat hit them like a wall when they stepped off that troop ship. Not the dry heat of Texas that Audie knew, but something thick and heavy that stuck to your skin and made every breath feel like work. The air smelled of diesel fuel, unwashed bodies, and something else. Something that took a moment to recognize: fear. the smell of men who knew they were about to find out what they were really made of. The 15th Infantry was assigned to a staging area outside the city. Rows of canvas tents stretched across the desert like a temporary town populated by boys pretending to be soldiers. Most of them had never fired a shot in anger. Most of them had never seen a dead body. Most of them thought war was going to be like the movies, with clear good guys and bad guys and heroic speeches before the big charge. Audie knew better. He'd seen enough of life to understand that real fights were messy, brutal, and personal. They weren't about glory or flags or speeches. They were about who wanted to live more, who was willing to do whatever it took to see another sunrise. And in the quiet hours before dawn, while other soldiers wrote letters home or cleaned their equipment for the third time that day, Audie lay on his cot thinking about something his mother had told him years ago. "Audie," she'd whispered during one of those long nights when there wasn't enough food and the future looked darker than the Texas sky. "Sometimes the world asks more of you than seems fair. Sometimes you have to be stronger than you thought possible. But if you remember why you're fighting, if you hold on to what matters, you can survive anything." That skinny kid from Texas who started life weighing less than 5 pounds would go on to earn every major combat award America could give. 33 medals, including the Medal of Honor. But the real story isn't about the decorations. It's about what happens when life forges someone in fire and poverty and loss, then gives them a cause worth fighting for. Audie Murphy proved that heroes aren't born, they're made. Made by circumstances that would break most people but create legends in a few. Thank you for watching Heroes of the Greatest Generation. If this story inspired you, like and subscribe, because these are the legends that built America, and they deserve to be remembered.